Hey everybody, I'm Erica Lukes, and this is Expanding Frontiers Research. I want to just say I hope all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I want to acknowledge the people that are here in chat. It's nice to see Emily, it's nice to see Pander Sarah, and also Bill, and I've got to go up here a little bit, Brad, Weirdo, Weirdo Marie. Yeah, sweet. This is going to be a really great show, and I can't think of a better way to spend a nice, relaxing holiday weekend than with John Tenney. I've met him once, and we had a great time. In fact, I really wish that I could get back to Michigan again and do that conference so I could hang out with him again. It was really, really fun. I want to also just take a moment to tell all of you who are supporting Expanding Frontiers Research that we appreciate everything that you do to help keep our organization going. We are constantly doing records requests, and we love going through file after file. We've been getting a great deal of work with regards to Ramtha. And so you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out our work. You can also go there to donate. We take PayPal, and also we have a Patreon account where we are giving information, uploading things that we are getting ahead of the public. So our Patreons get that special little gift, and it's really also fun. I want to say we had a great Zoom call last weekend. I appreciate the support and the love and the community that we are creating. And I think this is just going to keep going, and I'm really grateful for all of you. So without further ado, my partner in crime, Mr. Jack Brewer. Good evening, Jack. How are you?
Hi, good evening. I am doing great. Hello to everyone. Nice to see you all here. As Erica said, we appreciate you.
We absolutely do. And then the guest of honor, Mr. John Tenney. Da, 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 da.
Oh, geez. Hello,
I know
everyone.
that was a little over the top, but that's okay. Welcome to Friday night with Expanding Frontiers. So, first of all, I'm excited to talk about punk rock tonight.
Sure.
This is going to be
Talk about
good. We
anything
want
you
to
want.
talk about music and all sorts of fun things because I love, obviously, Jack and I are both musicians, and so we love talking about music. But John has been in the paranormal topic since a young age, and he found a mentor, which we're going to hear a little bit about tonight, and really kind of went down the JFK rabbit hole, conspiracies, all sorts of things. And he's had a really interesting life in the subject. He's met lots of interesting people. In fact, one of his first UFO gatherings actually went to see Lorraine Warren. And I learned this on Emily's show, Weird Reads with Emily Louise. But he got to go see the Warrens, who are very famous in paranormal circles. I think we all know about them. We'll talk a little bit more about them as well. But then he found himself hanging out in a room full of the old guard in ufology. So really great kind of getting thrown into the mix of things. I look forward to talking about that. He also does a great show, and we're sad that Jessica isn't here tonight as his partner in crime, but we will definitely get her back, and he will tell us a little bit more about that. And so, John, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here, and you have so many other accomplishments and things that you've written and all sorts of cool things that you've done over the years. But I want to start with your childhood because I mean you were a little punk rock guy. Let's hear about it.
I was a punk rock kid, but I had like a great family life. Like that's one of those odd things that never happens. Usually people are like punk rock because they're have terrible home lives and they're rebelling against their parents. On my 16th birthday, I was hanging out in front of a record store with all of my punk rock friends, just to give an example. And my mother pulled up in her car, and I was like 16 years old. I'm like, oh no, here comes my mom. And she got out of the car and she opened up the back door, and she had a huge black frosted cake with a skull and crossbones on it. And she brought plates and forks and said, "This is for you and all your friends. Happy birthday." And like drove back home.
What a cool mom.
What a cool mom.
Oh, I love that. And my parents, and I heard Emily saying on her show as well that her parents were very loving and very accepting. And, you know, my mom was the same type. It sounds like your parents were. It's like, if you're doing it in the house, if you're, you know, express yourself, you know, find your mojo. And, you know, I'm surprised that my mom made it through that. But we had a really cool record store here called Cosmic Airplane. And it was where all the magicians, well, they probably worked there too. The musicians worked there, all the punk rock. I mean, that was kind of one of those things, and you could buy books on the occult and all sorts of stuff. But that was kind of one of my first introductions to all of that. And I have to ask you, did you watch the movie Salt Lake Punk?
I didn't.
Okay. Someday you'll have to watch that. That was kind of an interesting movie, and that also dealt with one of the main characters was somebody that I dated back in 7th and 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if I should be telling people these things, but you know, really interesting. Salt Lake had a very cool punk scene here.
Yeah, the movie that I saw that really influenced me. So Detroit, for some reason, has always had these really cool pockets of independent, like record stores, guys who would rent out movie theaters and show independent films. And so I was probably maybe 13 when my sister took me to a midnight showing of a movie called Arg, A Music War. And it was just everybody that you can think of. It was just a live show, the Cramps and the Dead Kennedys. And
Oh, wow.
like when I saw that for the first time, I was just like, oh, this is like what I need to be involved in. And the way that I grew up in my family, we loved each other, but we were very argumentative at dinner because we would talk about anything. Everything was on the table, including the food, but you could argue with adults at dinner, but you had to prove your points and you had to have like logic behind what you were saying. And so the whole concept of getting to a certain age and then realizing there was this whole subsegment of society that was talking about ghosts and monsters and UFOs and flying saucers and psychedelics and just magic in general. And knowing that nobody took it seriously, you weren't allowed to like really talk about it openly in public. That was the part of like my punk rock mindset that said like, oh, these are the people I want to talk to because they're talking about things that people tell them they shouldn't be talking about.
Don't you love that? I mean, there's just something about that underground, you know, that counterculture that is so intriguing. And I loved that as well. And it was funny because I was just thinking about the Dead Kennedys today and singing one of their really catchy songs, which I will not be singing here, but they, you know, they were quite interesting. Who is your favorite, if you had one punk band that you liked, who would be at the top?
You know, it'll be so like the Dead Kennedys made a big influence on me, but so did Crass and Conflict, Discharge. God, there's just a lot. Circle Jerks. And then like, I don't know if they're considered punk, but like for sure the Butthole Surfers at a certain point had a big influence on me. But it was a lot of stuff that was counterculture, right? It was people who were making fun of the government and people who were making fun of society at large and in general. Like that was the stuff that I was like, oh, everyone here is poking the bear of society, right? Like the common socially held ideas of what you're supposed to do and think about and listen to. Those were the bands that really interested me. So when you heard Jello Biafra singing Winnebago Warrior or like singing against Nazi punks and fuck off, like I was like, oh, I'm here for it 100%.
So much fun. So did you skateboard?
I only ever skated for travel. I was never any good at doing any tricks. You know, I walked a lot. And then when I realized I could get like a little bit faster to places riding a skateboard, then I would skate for travel. But I have tons of friends who go back to this. So in the kind of early 80s in Michigan, we created what's now called 696. It's a huge highway that connects kind of the east side and west side of Michigan. But when they made it, it was the longest unused piece of concrete in the world.
Oh, wow.
And so for 1 year before the road opened, it was done being built, but it wasn't open. And so for a year, every skateboarder in the world came here because you could get on this brand new piece of concrete and you could skate for 26 miles, like, and and there were no cops, no cars. Like, so got to meet like Christian Hosoi and Tony Hawk, and like all those people were just staying in my friends' basements.
How freaking cool. I had a Sims Lester. And, I thought my girlfriend and I were like, all right, we're going to go for this. And half the time, I think we would take pictures of each other, and then we'd like flip the skateboard on its side. And then I'm like, okay, jump, so look like we were doing cool tricks. I mean, we actually were pretty good at we could stay upright, which was comforting. And it was kind of a cool way to get around town and get exercise and to hang out with the cool kids. And I really liked that. So that's fun.
And it also, being in that community also gave me, I realized this later, kind of upon reflection. At that time, in the kind of paranormal communities and occult communities, there was stuff happening that was like metaphysical conventions and psychic meetups and stuff like that. But because I had grown up in this punk rock community where it was okay to go to a place where there were only going to be 6 people, and like it didn't matter how far away it was, you had this thing in common, and so you were going to get along with them. Like, I really feel like when I started traveling by myself to go to UFO conventions and to go to like, coven meetups and metaphysical conventions, like it felt like, oh, I'm already used to doing this. I'm already used to these small factions of people who all get along and travel weird distances to talk about weird stuff. Oh, you're muted, Erica.
I try to, multitask and chat, and then I unmute and mute, and who knows what happens. But thank you. It's fun to find that little group, those groups of people, like you say, that are just full of new ideas and wanting to push the boundaries and then create a safe space. I love that. Did you? So you named all the bands that you loved. What was your favorite concert?
Oh, so it wasn't a punk rock concert. My mother bought tickets for my sister and her friend, and because there was no one kind of to watch over me, even though I think I was 12 or 13 at the point, maybe 11, my mom bought me a ticket too, and we all went and saw the Purple Rain tour for Prince.
Oh, shut the front door.
That's the best concerts I've ever seen in life.
Of Hellfire and Damnation, no freaking way.
Yeah.
In Detroit?
Great. In Detroit at Joe Louis Arena. Just amazing.
Oh my God, I've got chills just thinking about that. He was that was the time. And I remember when that came out. And oh my God, in 1999, 1999 is one of my favorite albums. And I think Prince's B-sides are just phenomenal. But that must have been,
it was crazy. I mean, the height of his Purple Power and like the opening band, it was the time opened up, and then Sheila E. was drumming. Like, it was just all perfect. Everything aligned perfectly. And at the time, I was a little bit younger and it wasn't my real scene. But once like you're surrounded by, I don't know, 70,000 people and you're listening to Prince, and I'd heard it at home because my sister and mom played it, I was like, oh shit, I'm in the middle of something unbelievable. Like, even at a young age, you're like, this is a moment.
Oh my gosh, that is so freaking cool. So Jack, I know we've talked about it before, but what was your favorite concert?
Oh goodness. I've been to more than I can recall, I'll tell you that, but some that stand out in my mind, the Stones in Miami is always fun. I've seen them a couple times in Miami. I've seen them, I think I lost count, around 14 times or so, but like up and down the Eastern Seaboard. But in Miami, they were always seemed to drop a gear. I wanted, along those lines, to go back to John. You mentioned that, when there'd be a few kids around, that it would be fun. To me, that's one of the things that I appreciate about bands before they were popular. Like, to me, it would be one thing to like play for 40,000 people. And then in a way, I think that would be easier than an empty room. You know what I mean? In certain ways. And I saw a clip the other day where David Bowie was saying that he saw the Stones when no one knew who they were because they were opening for Little Richard and Bo Diddley. And he said that's what everybody was there for. And there were like 6 kids that went down to the stage while everybody else is just milling around doing other stuff while the Stones play because nobody's interested, you know. And I think that like that's what takes guts and fortitude. And like even at my local bar, sometimes I'll watch the guitar player sing and play, and while they're just standing there in the corner with no one paying attention, and I like really appreciate that, you know, that they're doing their thing and got to just get in their own world and like pretend there's 40,000 screaming fans or whatever it is they have to do, you know.
It's interesting because when in my musical career, I mean, like the most intimidated I ever got was to sing in a room full of five or 10 people.
Absolutely.
And I had 2 different bands, and we played the Olympics, the 2002 Olympics, with both bands. And some of those gigs were just phenomenal because you didn't. And this sounds bad, but there were so many people that it was just this sea of people, and you couldn't really, it wasn't like you could make eye-to-eye contact except for the few people in the front row. And so I think that took away from me, that made me less vulnerable. And I don't know what it is, but then also like that energy when you've got that. I mean, it's palpable. It's like being at a sporting event or things like that where you just that collective buzz. And I think you feed off of that. It's really a special experience. But I was thinking about it. I saw David Bowie on when he was doing, oh my gosh, the Let's Dance. What was that tour?
I know what you're talking about.
Dang it. Well, we'll think about it. But that was spectacular. And then back in the day, we had a really cool at the University of Utah, the Union Ballroom. And so like U2 and Bow Wow Wow and some of the bands, Oingo Boingo, came through, the B-52s, and they all played there. And it was, maybe like 300 people. And those were really cool shows.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I talked to people about too. Like for some reason, I have this, like my youth is somehow like an 80s film. Like if you really parse, like working at a record store in the 80s was just the perfect time because like you were saying, Erica, like there were bands coming through Detroit who were about to become enormous, but they're playing at places that hold 150, 200 people at the most, and like we did a ton of in-stores for bands that nobody had heard of at the time, but they were becoming someone. Like we had in-stores where like the band Sonic Youth did it in-store.
Oh, cool.
And Thurston and Kim's ride to their show after the in-store never showed up. So like I had to drive them to their show, like because they were just this band. They were just like Sonic Youth, like who knows who Sonic Youth is, right? And that happened like over and over because it was just the 80s and all these bands that were going to become huge in the 90s were just starting. A friend of mine used to book punk rock bands in the late 80s, early 90s, and they would play in the parking lot of a community college here. And so, I don't know, there'd be 30 or 40 punk kids would show up to see these bands that were coming from different parts of the country. And we got there one time and the college canceled the show. We couldn't use the parking lot anymore. So everybody that was there loaded up equipment from these bands and drove them to my friend John's house where the bands ended up playing in the basement. And one of those bands was Green Day. Like, but at the time it was like 30 kids showing up to see this band from California,
Oh my
nobody knew who they were.
That is so rad. Holy cow. Wow, that is so rad. I'm totally a Valley girl. I'm dating myself. I for a brief minute in time, I was doing the booking for a club here in town, and I booked the missing persons. And so had, spent a lot of time with them backstage. And it was one of those things like, you're saying, it's like you're in that up close and personal setting. And I will tell you that Dale Bozzio is a spicy mama.
Well, sometimes you'll see people on Twitter talking about that. So we did a in-store at the record store for this band called the Sugar Cubes years and years ago.
No.
And they they wanted Pez candy, so I went and I bought the entire box of Pez from a party store down the street. And when I brought it in, the lead singer or the guitar player like jumped over the table. He was signing records. He jumped over the table to grab the box out of my hand. But before he could grab the box out of my hand, the lead singer of the band jumped over the table and she punched me in the face and took the box out of my hand.
Bjork?
And that's Bjork. So you'll see sometimes on Twitter, I talk about this is an anniversary of the day that Bjork punched me in the face.
Oh, God. That is freaking legendary. That is the best story I've heard in a long time. And then did she apologize or was she just like going about the business?
Oh, no, they were just completely out of control over candy.
I know that she's different. She's definitely a crazy soul, but I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
It was their first time in America. The Sugar Cubes had just put out, I think the album was called Life is Good, which is, I think, their first, maybe their only record. And they barely spoke English, if they spoke any at all. It was just straight Icelandic. So, I mean, I think it was just the excitement of being on tour for the first time. And I showed up with this candy that they wanted. So they just kind of lost their minds.
Do you have any pictures of some of these things?
No, I mean, it's that period of time too where,
you had to be carrying a camera.
Yeah, if you have a 35 millimeter camera, I'm sure that someone at the record signing took pictures of them signing records. But our job at the record store was just to make sure they had what they wanted. So,
oh my gosh!
And it was that period in time where you get beat up for taking pictures.
Oh yeah, yeah, yep.
Wow. I remember The Cure played at that bookstore that I was talking about and stuff. And I mean, I've got it. You're jogging so many memories. So I've got to go back and try to look at some of the stuff. And I was the nerd that carried the 35 millimeter camera around. And so hopefully I've got some good photos I'll share, but what fun times.
Yeah. I think one of the things too, is I think just because we were record store workers, like the owners didn't want us bothering them with photos, Yep. We did have a wall of fame. Actually, we had a Polaroid camera in the back, and so when bands came through, we would just take a picture of the band holding the store cat. At the time, his name was Wendell. So it was all these bands just holding the cat, but we never thought of taking our picture. Why would we want a picture? Like that doesn't make any sense. That mindset is so different now. You've got to record yourself doing everything all the time.
Isn't that unfortunate? Yeah.
Back then you were like, I'm going to be in this moment right now with this happening and have this memory for the rest of my life. But now it's like, now I've got a picture. So,
and it is kind of sad, that now we're so, on our phone and documenting every stupid little thing that we're doing that we don't take, the time to just enjoy that memory.
Yeah. But at the same time too, I mean,
of tickets, damn it. We need printed paper tickets,
Yep. But that's that thing too, like, there's the good and bad aspects to it. I mean, my punk rock band, we probably played, I don't know, a few hundred shows over, just from basement shows to, driving to someone's house to play house shows. Only one of them exists on an audio cassette. And then there are probably only a dozen photographs of us. Like it's sad that stuff doesn't exist anymore, but at the same time too, like I think of some of the things I did and the person I was back then, and I'm super glad that not a lot of recordings and photographs exist.
There was something very liberating, and that was a good thing, because I talk about that's my best friend all the time. We've known each other since second grade, and it's just like, okay, I thank you, Lord, for not that much technology back then. That was groovy.
Yeah.
Just the past 10 years is bad enough.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but there was something really special about the 80s, though. I mean, that was the 80s and 90s. Oh, yeah.
That's a really good point, that what's lost to history might be better left. There might be a lot that's better left unsaid anyway. Yeah.
I have reflected back. I mean, obviously, evolving and growing and getting older and getting better ideas. When I look back, the thing that really, if anything, I don't like to give myself compliments, but if anything makes me proud of myself, it's that even when I was a teenager in the punk rock scene, like I wasn't a terrible person. Like there were so many of my friends got into like white power bands and
Right.
shaved their heads and became like racist skinheads and just like homophobes. And the fact that I was smart enough back then to not be like that is like one of the things that I'm proud of myself the most of.
Well, you know, you should be proud because I was going to ask you, that was a real, I mean, there were some pretty strong influences that were not good
Yeah.
back in the punk rock scene. So
Yeah,
that's good that you
Detroit.
had like a family that was grounding and you
Mhm.
obviously were taught to be, you know, a thoughtful human being.
I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, my father growing up was pretty racist, but you have that path, right? Like you can follow the model of your parents or or a parent, or you can learn from your parents' mistake and go in the opposite direction. And so, like seeing when my dad, he doesn't drink anymore, and he's not really he's not racist anymore. He's grown up and evolved his thoughts, but like even back then, I didn't want that hatred in my life. And
That's
I
a
wanted
good
to
way
make
to
friends
be.
with as many people as I could.
Right. You know what I mean? That's so nice, and it's refreshing these days, to be quite honest, because there's so many, you know, I mean, everybody's charged up and everybody hates everybody for everything, and it's really quite sad. But yeah, you sound like a really lovely and kind human being.
I
So,
try. Jessica says that I'm really, really nice and she doesn't understand it.
well, you know, she might be onto something. You know, sometimes you do you do wonder some days, but yeah, you sound just like I mean, I know you're a very nice person. I heard again, that interview you did with Emily was really, really great, and that showed a side of you with your work at the homeless shelter and
Mhm.
different things. You know, those are really, and you running for mayor and caring about your community and, you know, wanting to create unity. I mean, those are all really exceptional things, especially given, you know, the punk rock days, and then, you know, you throw yourself into the conspiracy world and the paranormal world, and then, you know, each of those worlds can be gateways for things that aren't above board and can really take you
Oh yeah.
into, you know, a direction that is really harmful, not only for you, but for other people in the community.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. And especially, you know, you and Jack know this, like not only is it a slippery slope into like, are you going to be a bad person, but it's a slippery slope when you have to tell people like, I'm not going to take a definitive stance. Like people ask me when when did I start believing in ghosts? And I have to tell people after 34 years of doing this, like I still don't believe in ghosts. I have a lot of ideas about ghosts. They fall on both sides of the fence. But as a researcher, if I'm being honest with myself, like I can't be biased in either direction or it skews my data in that direction. So like the hard thing is that walking that middle ground and saying like, here's the data, here's the evidence, here, I'll give it to people and you can make your own judgment and talk to your people about it and your friends about it. But for me to come out and say like, this is 100% a ghost or this is 100% a UFO, that is a slippery slope too, because you can end up getting into all sorts of weird nonsense once you start doing that. Once
Right.
you become the one who has the answers.
Well, a lot of people have made a good chunk of change doing that. Just ask Stephen Greer, you know, Mr. Biceps. It's never a dull moment in that regard. But yeah, it's, you know, for me, I know that I have, you know, I was not objective, you know, in the first, when I first got thrown into this. I mean, I was, but I tended to believe things that, you know, that I shouldn't have. And then I learned, and then I
Yeah.
saw the way people were treated, and I saw you know, the red flag
Mhm.
after red flag. And so I definitely have learned a lot. And then partnering with Jack, again, he's taught me things about that, and making sure that it's like you've got information and you're putting that out and you're not making an opinion either way. It's just, here you go. Here's that for you to decide what to do.
Yeah. Yep.
So tell us about your mentor.
So I have a series of mentors, and they each apply to a different aspect of my life. My first real mentor, the first two actually happened around the same time, but my first real mentor was a gentleman named Craig Ciccone. And he was a history researcher who specialized in political assassinations of the 1960s and 70s. So JFK, RFK, MLK, Malcolm X, Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton. And, you know, I met him randomly at a Denny's one night. It was just a synchronistic event. He had pictures out of the Kennedy assassination. I started talking to him, and, you know, he found in me someone that didn't know but had interest, and I was willing to ask questions and question his knowledge, which was good for him because, you know, as researchers, as an older researcher now, I love when people question me about the things that I'm telling them, right? And not just say, oh, well, you're the guy that's done this for a long time, you must know. Like, having someone question you, I think, is vital. And so, you know, it was through Craig that I learned how to conduct myself in research, conduct research, find information, send FOIA requests, learn how to deal with government entities when they're not treating you fairly, and just a stellar, spectacular teacher, all the way down to, you know, I would go to the library and I would find something that interested me that wasn't assassination related, like an old ghost story or something. And I would write at the top of it was a microfiche machine, right? So going through microfiche, and I'd make a printout copy, and then I'd write across the top in pen, like, oh, you know, March 13th, whatever. And all the way, Craig was like, oh, no, you don't mark on your copies in ink, you mark in pencil on the back, and you write it in this form and fashion so that another person can look at the back and know which column, which page, like everything down to like that. So yeah, Craig was a major influence on me. I would help him with lectures, and eventually, like, you know, there were a few times when he couldn't do the lecture, so I would do it for him. And at every point, you know, you're gathering new information, you're learning more and evolving your thoughts. And so randomly I would get questions like, do you think Kennedy was killed because he knew something about UFOs? Mm-hmm. And I would have to say, like, well, I don't know anything about that, so I can't talk about it. And I always felt shitty about that. Like, I wanted to be able to talk about it. So that meant I was going to have to read, like, about UFOs. And at the same time, around the same time I met Craig is when I met my first, like, witch, which was a woman named Marion Kuklo, and her witch name was Gundala. And she was the person who introduced me kind of to witchcraft and the occult, and big motherly figure, and very loving and kind. And she used to write a newspaper article in the local newspapers, giving people spells. I mean, this was, think about that. Think about that. Like, just the difference in a major or even minor newspaper right now that had a weekly column by a witch giving people spells in it. Like,
yeah,
I don't think that would go over well.
Nope,
I don't think that would go over well very much, right?
No, oh my gosh.
And then, well, also a little previous to that, to Marion and to Craig, I used to skip school a lot. And so I would go to the local library in my hometown of Royal Oak. And the gentleman that lived across the parking lot in the apartment upstairs, he was a retired doctor, and it was Jack Kevorkian. And so Jack would go to the Royal Oak Public Library almost every day. And so I'd sit there with him and ask him all these crazy questions that I had at the time. This was when he became known as Dr. Death. It was before he had done any assisted suicides. And he was more of a metaphysician at that time. Like, he had all these ideas about consciousness and outer space and the persistence of consciousness. And so I would talk to him about all of the ideas I had about ghosts and hauntings and stuff. So, and then later on in life, and this is all in my mid-teens, later on in life, 19 years old, my kind of spiritual, I guess you would say, mentor was a minister whose name was Jack Boland. And like, I would have conversations with him about the nature of reality and God and spirituality. So those are the big four: Jack, Marion, Craig, and Jack.
What a list.
And what a list.
And how cool that you could just, I mean, in each one of them you found that a need that you had was kind of fulfilled with them. Mm-hmm. And the Jack Kevorkian thing, that must have been absolutely insanely crazy. And he was just approachable and willing. Wow.
Yeah, he was just sitting in the library looking for, doing his reading and thinking. So before I worked at the record store, side note story, I think I quit the record store and started working, but some of that gets messed up because it happens so much within a couple of years. But I was working at a punk rock record store and BDSM store. It was like the same store in the same location. And Jack came in one afternoon and asked to see the owner. And I said, yeah, I'll get him for you. So I went and got the owner. They had a meeting, and then Jack left. And the owner of the store says to me, do you know him, right? And I go, yeah. And he goes, he just asked if he could pull his Volkswagen station or his Volkswagen bus in the alleyway and use our electrical outlet because he wants to kill someone in his VW van. And I was like, what? And I was like, what did you tell him? And he's like, oh, I told him, he should use the electrical outlets down like at Belle Isle in Detroit because they have RV plugs. Like he should go down there. And within like a week, Jack had done his first assisted suicide.
Holy cow.
But the thing that's I reflect upon that is like Jack was looking for people who thought differently, right? So the place that he went to ask the first time was like this punk rock record store bondage shop. Because he was like, if anybody's going to let them use their electricity because they have an open mind about things, it's going to be them.
Wow.
That could like identify the issue as First Amendment and civil rights and things like that as compared to a moral issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I never would have, even put those two together and thought about that. That's absolutely crazy. And I just want to go back because Bill has asked a question for you really quickly. And so if you don't mind just answering this, just give us your thoughts about the credibility or lack thereof of the UFO research community.
Ugh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it is. There you go.
I mean, if we're talking about the community as a whole, no community, every community has got bad apples in it. It's hard to say. It really is on a person by person basis, whether it's the UFO community or not. There are grifters and hucksters and hoaxsters and tricksters in every community just trying to make a buck. But I really think that given time, it's an old trope, right? Like given time, people will show you who they are. And so, when you see someone who has done something terrible in the UFO community for years and years, and then they vanish and wait for the tide to change, and then they show back up again,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're like, oh, so you're re-grifting like a new community. And those people are pretty easy to find, or when people pop out of nowhere. But I really think it's a person by person basis. It's a difficult question. I think that what's going on now, that's going to lead to a larger question. I think what's going on now is showing us that it's almost as easy to grift now as it was in the 1940s and 50s. And in the 1940s and 50s, I think that it was easy for people to kind of make up stories and portray themselves in a different way because the exchange of information was so hard. The newspapers took a while to get to places. Stories took a while to get everywhere. Like you couldn't really fact check. There's no internet. So, if Daniel Fry wanted to say he was a doctor, he could say he was a doctor and then write books about it for years before anybody ever thought to go like to England and check up and see if he was an actual doctor from that school. Like it took 15 years for anybody to figure that out. Now the information exchange is so much faster. And so it's moved into an area where we hear all the time, oh, I can't talk about that because it's government classified. I have NDAs. Like, So what they've done is they've realized, oh, information can be found out really fast now. So we have to put ourselves and blanket ourselves in this camp of secrecy where we can't allow you to know the information right now because it's so secret. It's the same grift. It's just a different dress.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it is amazing to me. I mean, just historically to look at, the grifters back then, and like you say, with the way information travels and moves, now it's like they're just slicker. And they also, I think, because of the internet and having that ability, it's like they've formed groups, that are, and then there are, foreign influence campaigns and different things that are involved in all of this. And so and people that are paying public, or marketing firms and things
Mhm.
like that as well to disseminate information or a certain story. And so that makes it, it's a very interesting time to live with regard to that. Jack, did you have anything? Did you hear that? I know you're.
I did hear that. Yes. I think that that's interesting, and I certainly think that John and Erica are among the people that have qualified opinions on the topic. I think when it comes to disingenuous people and the UFO subculture, that one of the things that separates it from a circus, like a literal circus, where there's, the two-headed goat, or the, frozen ice man in the cooler, whatever the sensational story and ticket price may be, is that these UFO stories often affect us at very deep emotional levels. We're not invested in the circus or the fun house or the Halloween haunted house that's just, an evening out and then we're going to go get a pizza or something, where we tend to take it very seriously emotionally. Our UFO sighting, our high strangeness stories. And so many people that get involved in this then have an experience in the subgenre or the community of going through a series of interactions with people that seemed really intent on influencing their beliefs and their interpretations of their experiences. And that's just altogether different than it's all good fun, let's spend the night at America's Most Haunted Hotel kind of thing. It's just altogether different when it becomes spiritual abuse and hypnosis abuse, and oftentimes documented, observable, abusive behavior. It's just different when it's a very human, almost primordial level of substance and identifying with these experiences. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like if I see something in the sky and then I come to believe it's very significant to the very essence of my being and my purpose on the planet, was it because I tend to think it's because I was conditioned to have an assumption about what I saw before I ever even saw it. I think that happens a lot. But as far as just the nature of the credibility of the community as a whole, I would very much suggest that, buyer beware. And if we want to honestly learn about what some of these UFO sightings and experiences of high strangeness mean and indicate, then there's a lot of related areas we need to study, in addition to paperback books that are just story after story after story after story. And that's the value of what John was saying about people that will give him an argument or ask him questions that cause him to think about how he's framing things, that's very important and helpful, that we need to be made aware what the counter argument is. We need to know, and it doesn't have to be confrontational or caustic or toxic. Just, like, we could all name quote unquote skeptics that make some reasonably good points that people like to ignore. And they've been part of the culture for decades too. And we have to at least know what their argument is. Like, I have to understand logical fallacies in order to, at least, even if I don't agree, I need to understand why my argument might be dismissed out of hand by the very group of people that are who we're trying to convince of something,
Yeah, that's you're right on, Jack. And I want to ask you, John, do you see, because you've been in both realms, I mean, you do a lot of stuff with the paranormal and then the UFO, you're straddling both worlds there. What do you think the dangers are in the paranormal community? And do you think that they are maybe less than what you would experience in the UFO community?
I think for anyone who has an experience of high strangeness, whether it's UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts or psychic phenomena, whatever, I think the main point that I try and get across to an experiencer of any of those things is that at a very base minimum, it's your experience meant for you. It doesn't need to be everyone's experience. It doesn't need to be your experience was the end all be all of all experiences. It was meant for you. And it may not be qualifiable or quantifiable by anybody else's research. It might just be a momentary high strangeness blip that was meant for you. It means something to you personally. It's not meant to be deep dive by scholars and researchers. You can just tell it as a story, and you can use that. I say in my lectures all the time, if none of it is real, if there's no such thing as ghosts, if there's no such thing as UFOs, and there's no such thing as Bigfoots, if all it is a mechanism for us to talk to each other about what we're experiencing and feeling as human beings on this planet right now, it's a mechanism to talk to other people and to gain knowledge about other people, then it's still vastly important, whether or not anyone can figure out if it was real or not. And I see people seeming to do, you're talking about some of the damage it might do. I see people wanting acceptance of their experience by other people so much that it's damaging to them psychologically, sometimes physically. When the reality is you just have to accept it as your experience. Like, once you've accepted it, it doesn't matter again who else believes you or not. If the best read researcher believes you or not, or the skeptic can debunk it, you understand it for the experience that you've had. I had a near-death experience when I died. I was 18. I had a heart attack. I was dead. They got my heart started again. I had a weird experience, and it took me 5 years to process that. Like, I went to therapists and counselors and talked to my family and friends about it, and didn't even really mention it until 5 years later, because I was processing this paradigm shifting event that happened to me. And that's fine. Like, people who have a paradigm shifting experience, I understand wanting to get it out to the world and tell people that you've come to understand this larger event. That's great. But also, you need to internalize it. You need to look at it. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your reality around you? And I think when people are too quick on the path to want it explored and examined and proven by other people, that's where it can do a lot of psychological damage to people. Because then you end up believing that you're the only person on the planet that talks to Orthon. You're the only person on the planet that's ever had an interaction with Venusian. You're the one that understands the Men in Black. You're the one that understands the UFO phenomena. And I think that's where it can do damage to you psychologically, because there's all these contrary points of experiences that other people have had that don't make any sense to yours. So you start believing theirs is fake, they believe yours is fake, and then it's all just fake to everyone.
And I mean, I think that is really important. I know for me, I've had experiences, that I will not share. I mean, I do maybe with some people, but things that perhaps maybe in 10 years, as I learn more, I can explain. But for me right now, they're my experiences. Those are things that I hold very closely to me. And I don't need anybody else to make sense of them for me, because I understand, exactly what you're saying. If you kind of, sometimes you fall into these groups that aren't grounded in reality, or there's a grift, or there is something nefarious going on, then that experience that should be sacred to you turns into something that it can become very ugly and dangerous, as you say, to the person involved.
And, here's a thing that this is a new thing, because they just had the most recent UAP hearings, right? There's this other thing too, to lessen a person's experience. Your experience is enough. Like, whether you've seen a UFO or not, whether your high strangeness experience is just finding a feather and believing it's a message from a loved one, that's enough. It's your experience. But to lessen the experiences of other people still happens. In the newest UAP hearing, I think it was one of the senators, I can't remember which one, but he started by saying something to the effect, I'll have to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact phrase, but I will get one word of it right. He said, thank you for coming here. We actually have witnesses and are getting testimony from real people, not some guy who can be blown off who lives in a Winnebago, right? Like, just a senator saying that is saying the only people that we should believe are the ones that we're telling you to believe.
And that's a savory lot, let me tell you.
Yeah, and it's right back to every news station for the past 50 years. Whenever they interview anyone that's had a high strangeness experience, playing the X-Files theme behind them, or playing the Addams Family theme behind them, or whenever anybody says, oh, the only people who see UFOs are just hillbillies out in the field standing by the fence looking up at the sky. Like, here we are now, 2024, and you have a senator saying, like, it's not just a guy who can be written off because he lives in a Winnebago. Like, it's the same thing.
And yeah, and that whole crew. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on behind the scenes or in front of everybody with regard to that and that cast of characters. But that is, that really says something. That's unfortunate. But
I think a point too that, I mean, you're both bringing up a number of good and interesting and valid points. But you're talking about that it's okay to just have a story, that it doesn't have to be presented to an investigator from a scientific organization that's gonna come out and do something with field equipment and all this kind of stuff. It's okay to just tell your friends your stories. And another thing that happens, if we try to package these stories for mass consumption or scientific consumption, or the investigator's going to put me in his book or whatever, it's oftentimes not just my story. There's other people involved in it. And if I want an investigator to take it seriously, well, then it does matter who was with me. What did they do for a living? What are they like? What was the date? Where was it? Can I talk to the people that worked at the strip mall? The whole thing. Whereas maybe none of them want to be in anybody's book or on a TV documentary. And once you start talking about it on a podcast or this or that or the other, one needs to have those boundaries of, I just told my story for the podcast. I just wanted to share it at the conference with like-minded people. I'm not looking for a forensic investigation of something that it subjectively happened in 1974. Okay, I think that's a really good point too. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is too, is if you're going to make yourself a public figure, and you're going to make yourself a public figure based around your story, whatever your story is, and you want people to engage with your story, the answer to getting that engagement shouldn't be, here is my story, please don't ask me any questions about it because I can't tell you.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And Americans at large, this is not exclusive to the paranormal or the UFO communities, but we typically do really poor jobs with boundaries and taking care of ourselves. We generally aren't real good at that. And yeah, there is definitely some responsibility to, if I put it in a book and I want it taken seriously and accepted as fact, well, then I do owe some explanations about the details. And the other side of that is, if I'm looking for someone to investigate my story, a mutual UFO network or an organization, it's okay to ask them what they provide. Like if you're thinking about going to a counselor or a therapist, like you shouldn't expect a forensic scientific investigation from a mental health therapist. And I'm here to tell you, if they claim to provide one, you need to get the hell away from them. That should be emotional support. And you shouldn't accept you shouldn't look for professional emotional support from the guy that's going to measure the area for electromagnetic frequencies. And that gets really blended and mixed up in a lot of UFO circles.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's another thing too, is to look at, and maybe this is just wrong of me, maybe this is just, I need to do more work on my own journey, but like if someone is going to profess a belief in, let's just say, UFOs and extraterrestrials, and they make themselves, again, a public figure about it, and they want to be known for it, I will have to look at who they are as a person on whether or not it logically makes sense for them. If I have someone who is a transphobe or a racist, and yet they're telling me that they're in contact with aliens and it's all about like brotherly universal love,
Right.
This is fucking illogical. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Especially if they've spent the experiencer has spent their whole life demeaning and diminishing other people who live on this planet with them.
Exactly.
Want a wall built. Yeah.
And I mean, and unfortunately, that is a good portion of people involved in the subject. And I mean, as we've seen that with, John Venturi and a lot of folks at MUFON. Unfortunately, they're good folks at MUFON, but, it is really sad that that's kind of where we are. And like you said, this benevolent space beings, and, they're all, holding their hand up, and they're all blonde, and, really it's great. Brotherly love when it comes to, the benevolent blonde-haired, blue-eyed space beings. I mean, it's...
That kind of segues, as long as we're here.
Oh boy.
Let's go ahead and stay here a few minutes. I find fascinating about Detroit folks in general that you have lived in that political scene. I mean, all cities have their stuff, but there's been some highlights up there.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a question about it as much as, what do you have any comments on that? And maybe how do you see your experience in that political climate being a benefit of how to navigate the current climate on a national scale?
Yeah, I mean, we're all somewhat, some part of us, creatures of environment, right? And I really do think that the adversity that the city of Detroit has been through and the surrounding communities, there's this level of tenacious distrust that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we want to believe you, but we need to check you, right? Because you can also do unmitigated damage, like it can just happen, right? And so I think growing up in that type of community where not only is it a vibrantly diverse community of people and we have to learn how to talk to each other and get along. We've seen what happens when that doesn't happen and experience that, whether it be because for years we were known as the most notorious city in the United States, and nobody wanted to come here because it was such a terrible place, and yet everybody that was living here was like, it's actually fine here, and so having to fight against our own country telling people it was okay to live here and be a person from here, that really does cover and color some of how I do research and how I approach stuff, because I know that even though I don't like you, I might have to get along with you as a researcher because you might have information that I need, right? And so sure, we might vary on certain aspects, but the other thing that comes with that too is I'm not personally, there are certain lines that are not going to be crossed. If you are a full-blown racist, if you are a bigot or a Nazi or whatever, I'm not going to deal with you. I can find the information for myself.
Sure. I understand. Some of my first delving into the Detroit corruption scene was when Stephen Bassett had his citizens hearing on disclosure. And when I could finally pry from him who some of the former senators were who were going to be sitting in on the hearing, I discovered one of them was a former Detroit politician, and her family was embroiled in corruption, former mayor, things like that. And we have, our problems in Florida. I mean, a lot of them are well known. Some of them are lesser known, some of the corruption, because things like the governor's office get more attention. Sure. Where at a city level, yeah, there's some towns and cities that have just like thrown in the towel and don't even try anymore. And I don't really, like I say, I don't really even have a question to formulate around that, other than it says something about the whole situation that, like, Bassett, this was the quality that Bassett was inviting. And at the same time, there's something to be said for, well, when a person, stood their ground and faced the charges and they're on the other side of it, they're entitled to do anything anybody else wants, or anything they want. And that's part of the problem we're having at a national level now too, is if the courts didn't do anything, well, then your moral judgment is irrelevant,
Right.
Like I say, there's not really even a question formulated around that, as I respect and I admire the Michigan and the Detroit citizens for what I know enough about to know I don't know a lot of the story.
Yeah, I think that Detroit is a good example of when a city can learn lessons, which is always good. Like as a citizen of a place where you're like, oh, if an entire city can learn this lesson, like I can learn this lesson too, right? And again, so much of it has to do with diversity. Just as an example, I talk about sometimes at my lectures, because we live in the United States and it's very Eurocentric, and I'll do, paranormal investigations, and people call me because they think their house is haunted or has a ghost. Like, because we have such a diverse community in this area where I'm at, I'm only about 15 miles from the city of Dearborn, which is a heavily Middle Eastern community. They don't have ghosts there. And I learned that very early. They had jinn, they didn't have ghosts. And so I couldn't approach it from one mindset. I couldn't approach it as a Eurocentric idea of ghosts. I had to start learning, there's different ways of thinking about spirituality, ghosts, hauntings. And that carries over too into whether it was the conspiracy theories at the time or UFOs at the time. Like, maybe there's more than one way, my way of thinking about this experience.
Yeah. Actually, along those lines, I've seen you say, or, say on social media or something to that effect, something along the lines of sometimes just don't be a jerk, and there's a lot to be said for that. There's some folks on social media that I disagree with, like, virtually everything they're about, but then you see them around through mutual contacts or whatever. And I'll often think about your position on that I'll think, you don't have to tell somebody what you think every time they mention an opinion that you don't agree with. They know people are out here that don't agree, and just don't be a jerk. Sometimes just don't be a jerk.
Yeah, for sure. And so this is part of my journey that I'm still on, which is kind of what I was saying earlier. For me, there is a cutoff point, though. There are people that I just refuse to deal with and work with. And, maybe that's a failing of my personality on my journey. But at this point, like, there are researchers that I have known for decades. And at some point in a conversation with them, it'll come up that they have a very bad belief system in something that affects people that I love, the people around me, my community, my society. And there's nothing wrong with letting people go.
That's right. There are non-negotiable issues too.
And I think a lot of times people, they've read this guy's books for so long, or they've heard this guy speak for so long, or they've read, this doctor's ideas for so long, and they don't want to let the person go once their ideas start to become, these are terrible ideas. Like, this is something that the UFO community has dealt with for years and years and years. Like, I used to do lectures about Buck Nelson and him, going to outer space with his dog and the Mars and Moon and Venus stories from the 1950s. But then, like, as soon as I found out that one of his first books was like this racist tirade against Black Americans, I was like, I'm not going to talk about Buck anymore.
Yeah.
Good. And, that's something that we don't, I know that we've got a community now. Like, I see all of these people, everybody in chat, and everybody we're all on the same page with regard to that, and making sure that if somebody is engaged in behavior that is damaging or illegal, and that it's like, well, we do have boundaries. We should have boundaries. We should have stronger boundaries in this topic than in a lot of other topics, which I hate to say, but there's so many interesting people with shady pasts and criminal pasts, and we don't pay attention to that. And I've been amazed over the years, and I've talked a lot about this on my shows and with Jack, but I'm amazed that people want to whitewash the history of this. And I see this, specifically with people in the archive community, who it's like, we are going to make sure that we're hiding information about this researcher from the past, personal correspondence, because we want to make sure that we are, promoting the UFO community, the UFO topic. And to me, especially right now, with, in my opinion, all of the UFO archives right now getting kind of pigeonholed into one place where who knows if anybody's going to actually see all of them or see the correspondence between people, which is very telling. I mean, that those things concern me about the history of the subject and making sure that people understand that some of these people that they're looking up to now, because you've got the new generation, you know, they are looking up to people that have really, they are very compromised. So.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting too, you were saying about like the kind of combining of archives, and because what happens is like none of that is really being overseen, right? Like there's if something is happening, like if you have the National Archives or you have the Library of Congress, like there are rules that have to be followed, right? You can't not digitize certain letters and just like throw them in an envelope so that no one will ever see them again. Right? Everything has to be digitized, everything, that there are rules that
Right.
must be followed if you're creating an archive. And so when it is, you know, interesting to see people, I have a ton of stuff that I've collected over 34 years that, you know, no one will ever see unless they're in my house. And someday maybe it'll all be digitized and whatever. But like there are ways that archives can just hide information from people, just misclassify it, put it in the wrong folder, destroy it.
Right. And that, it's, in my opinion, is happening in full steam ahead right now. And, you know, I think that it, for people that do have important work and have different archives across the country, I think it would behoove everybody if there was a uniform, you know, kind of, these are our code, this is our code, these are our ethics, this is what we're going to do to preserve the history and make sure that we are not interpreting that history for the benefit of a few people, or, you know, to keep a subject alive that, you know, maybe shouldn't be, and to glorify people who shouldn't be glorified. And to me, that there's a real danger, especially right now, because obviously, I think people can understand what I'm saying. So
I think what's interesting is I think that there's, because this happens a lot in the kind of ghost hunting and Bigfoot community parts of the high strangeness communities, which is it's difficult to imply, like to want to create a system of rules and ways to investigate or ways to keep track of information, because what happens is people then don't find it as fun, right? And so then there's a rebellion against like, well, why do I have to do it this way? And it's not that anybody's trying to be limited. It's just that we're trying to collect and compile all of the information that's possible. You know, you have these allegedly haunted locations that I go to. There's certain places which get investigated by ghost hunters every single night of the week. Like there's just ghost hunters there every night of the week. If there was a way to collect information, like you might start to see trends, right? Like over the past 20 years of this place getting investigated every single night, people might find out, oh, it's actually most active on the third Thursday of November at 9 o'clock. If people were keeping track and organizing everything in the same manner. But since it's not, you just end up spinning your wheels and saying, oh, this place just seems haunted. And then if you were to try and give that information to the scientific community or the skeptic community, they're going to say like, well, what's your methodology? How long have you been tracking this? How long have you been collecting information like this? And so then all of a sudden, for the people who are doing it because it's fun and it's cool and it's kooky, which it's fine to do that stuff because it's fun and cool and kooky, it just seems to become a bummer. What we're seeing now with UAP stuff, it's a bummer. Like no one's talking about flying saucers and UFOs anymore. All people are doing is arguing abbreviations for government organizations and if they work for them or not. Like it's not interesting anymore.
Right. And I think for me, you know, having what I have in the EFR archive, to me, the most interesting and telling thing about all of this, it is the correspondence. They are the flyers for conferences. You know, they are, I mean, all of these things that some of the old guard is completely pushed aside because they didn't feel that was relevant, because they were then, and they still are looking for that one UFO case to break the bank. And it's just like that blows my mind that what's happening. I mean, so Jack, what are your thoughts on that? I know you've got a few.
Like James Carrion said the other week when we were talking with him, that we've compiled enough sightings. Now if people just want to share their stories like we were talking about, okay, but organization after organization after organization just collects data, compiles it, and doesn't so much as even create an assessment of what they think it indicates. Just compiles. I've learned a lot of things interacting with Erica the past few years, John, and among them is that a lot of people in the archive community don't read what they collect. They don't even know what they have. They just are collecting stuff. If the objective is to organize and disseminate, well, y'all can get on that anytime you feel like it. You can start labeling and organizing and disseminating instead of chasing more files that you don't know what's in them. That's pretty much how I feel about that, and trying to reinvent the wheel or act like there's some big thing going on here that's another reason we're not assessing the data is in a professional research capacity. And by that, I mean that would be identified as credible and coherent by the people we're supposedly trying to convince of something, academics. There's not anything in these reams and reams and reams of sightings. You cannot prove what is in an object or its origin or what it's even made out of from just taking a picture of something.
Right.
There's, like if we would stop getting conned long enough to think about what we're actually doing. One of the reasons I got so much more interested in the FOIA process than other aspects of anomalistic investigation is I'm just a guy with a laptop. What am I supposed to be able to establish happened in any given UFO case? So at least with records, I can sink my teeth in them and say, here's what these agencies collected, here's what they got, here's what it looks like might be the case. So I have a lot of opinions on that, Erica. Thank you for asking. I would like, if it doesn't throw you off too much, I would like to circle back a little to, I had said to John that his experience in Detroit, might give us some insight on how to batten down the hatches and his mindset for the coming years. And I think I could pose that to you as well. You're in a very red state. Separation of church and state almost doesn't happen. I don't know if people would really even understand it. Certainly not to the extent that others might define it. And how does your experience with that color what you see coming in the months and years ahead?
I think this is a really, but I think it's a very unnerving time that we're living in. And I see, especially what's going on, here in Utah, I see what our governor is doing. I see what our attorney general has done. I see the people that they hang out with who are, convicted. Well, they should be convicted of sexual assault at the very least. And there's a lot of obfuscation here. As you know, Jack, we do a lot of grammar requests here in Utah. And now the governor has thrown a wrench into that. And several people are no longer with the State Records Committee. That was a pretty slick organization. that is now being undermined, in my opinion. So that'll be it'll be interesting to see the lack of transparency with regard to not only the political scene, but then you've got some of the things that we've investigated, accountability, tax fraud, things like that. So I think that's going to be troubling, especially here in Utah. And I also am very concerned about the lack of loving other human beings. And this is, our governor is front and center for saying some of the most vile things under the banner of Christianity and Mormonism, and that is very disturbing to me. And then you throw in, the way that certain figures in the UFO community are very much enmeshed in the political scene here, and are friends of the governor or friends of the attorney general, and they're grifting on this and that, and so that those are. It's interesting. It is also good, though, that we're seeing very clearly the connections between where the money's flowing from, what they're telling the public, and all of these things. I think that's just, things are coming to light. And so it's ugly. It's going to be real ugly the next few years. I hate to say it, but at least hopefully we can see some light at the end of the tunnel and know that we've got good people like you, John, who is very... Okay, yeah, go ahead.
To your point, when you were talking about reading the kind of memos and letters back and forth from researchers to researchers, I think one of the important points, and we've kind of gotten there organically thanks to Jack's questions about this and your answer, which is something we can do, which I think has been realized now probably in the past 10 years. One of the things that we can do by looking at whether it's government information that does get released or the way that people are interacting on social media is we can make connection with who is talking to who, right? And so what you're seeing in the accountability of, like, someone realized maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, someone realized, oh, people are starting to not just look at the experience, they're starting to look at who we're talking with and who we're sharing information with. And that's something as researchers where you can start build good connections about what's really happening, right? When you see that someone worked for this organization who is being promoted by a person who also worked for this organization, who is being promoted by someone whose father owned that organization, and you realize, oh, this is just the same 15 people. And that's why you get FOIA laws rewritten. That's why I think, I don't know if it ever gotten taken down, but I know in 2016, like, they stopped releasing the logs of who was visiting the White House. Like, they realized, like, oh, if people see who we're talking to, they'll figure out what we're doing. And so I think that's something that we're really seeing come to fruition right now, right? Like, if you have a terrible senator with terrible ideas and he is being called, like, my good friend from across the aisle by another guy who doesn't have terrible ideas, but is willing to, like, work with him on this subject. Again, what I was just saying, there are certain lines as for a researcher, I'm not going to cross with a person. If you're a terrible fucking person, I'm not fucking dealing with you, right? But yet you'll see a terrible senator with a horrible track record on human rights or, anything, openly flaunting their friendship with this person because of UFOs or UAP, right? So what the fuck is going on there?
Well, and then you look at the fact that, more majority of these people that are crossing, aisles are involved in crypto and supporting that, which is just like, okay. And that, to me, and you bring up such a great point, we don't look at the bigger picture. And if you do start digging and you say, oh, this person has this shell company, this person's got this going on, this is the collective agenda, this is who this person is funding and, wants to put into, the public political arena. I mean, it's all very, you can see this very clearly, that nobody's been hiding these things. It's just that people want to believe so bad, and the powers that be are so good at creating the smoke screen. look over here. Hey, just kidding. No, it's actions going on over here. And Skinwalker Ranch is such a perfect example of that in a little, microcosm, because it's like you've got people, okay, it's ghosts. Well, no, wait a minute, it's UFOs. Okay, wait, you got this, the shape-shifting werewolf, but no, it's the dino beaver. But no, this is really actually human experimentation, and the whole time all these guys are singing and dancing their way to the bank, and there are other things going on behind the scenes, with the Uintah Basin and some of the deals that they have politically, so on and so forth. So I mean, yeah, we have to do our due diligence and understand the bigger picture. John, you're absolutely correct.
And I'll tell you something. This just comes from working in TV for so long, because I started working in television in the early 90s, and just my personal experience, right? So draw from it what you will. But every show that I've ever worked on, we've had certain non-disclosure agreements with the network or the production company or the company that was funding it, whatever. I've broken every single one of those NDAs over the years, just because I want people to know what's actually happening. If someone is filming a television show and something radically earth-shaking happens during the filming of that television show, but then you can't talk about it because you have an NDA, you're lying. You can talk about it. Like I've had networks tell me, I walked off the set of Paranormal State years ago, back this 14 years ago, 15 years ago, and they were like, oh, we're going to sue you for breach of contract if you talk about this, it's $1 million or whatever. And I said, yeah, that's fine, go ahead. Like, I don't have it, like, but go ahead, waste your time, like, roll it over, make yourself look terrible, because I'm going to tell people about this horrible thing that happened. And they never did, because it's all like, it's a television network, right? And so when you have people saying like, all this fantastic, unbelievable, world-shaking stuff is happening, but we can't tell you until you watch next week. First of all, you filmed it months ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, don't tell anybody till the spring season. Yeah,
right. Plus, you have to remember, if like there's people that are miking you up that don't have NDAs. Usually, sometimes they do, but you have other cameramen on the set. You have craft services people who are making sure there's potato chips around. Like, if this earth-shaking stuff has happened on your television show, someone's gonna fucking talk about it. Like, you don't have to wait until the spring season starts. Right.
I know the men with lasers out there on the mesa. That's you got to keep a lid on that.
Yeah, and even when it comes to like government NDAs, right?
Right.
Like, there are some. So I was working at an advertising agency back in the 2000s, and I had to work on a advertising campaign for Boeing Lockheed Martin, right? And because I was doing this advertising campaign, I had an NDA with them, and not allowed to talk about what I was supposed to be doing. Now, I'm talking about it now because it's expired and whatever. But at the time, my NDA covered the fact that I couldn't say I had an NDA. So when you're working in high-level, top military government secrets, right, as all these people are saying that they do, and they're saying that they have non-disclosure agreements with the government, they're already breaking their NDA by saying they have an NDA.
Right.
Because you're not allowed to talk about it.
Isn't that curious? But yet nobody asks, nobody calls them on the carpet. It's like, we've got this, Corbell's got this latest leaked footage and of Lord knows what. And, but okay, you're not in prison. Why?
I had a friend of mine that I went to school with, ended up joining the Navy after high school, and he's now retired from the Navy. There were 10 years where I had no idea what he did or where he was. Like, he had a top secret, high level security job, and he had it for 10 years, and none of his friends, none of his family, nobody knew what he did. And he didn't talk about it. He didn't say that he had an NDA. He just didn't talk about it.
Yeah, like, to know him was to know you don't talk to the guy about what he does.
100%. Yeah. And then like after he retired out, like he was allowed to tell us, he was a submarine commander. And like, he released pictures of him like standing in the Oval Office with presidents and stuff like that. And we were like, holy crap.
Wow.
But even then we knew not to ask him, what did you do? Because he wasn't going to tell us. Like we knew, like he told us, I was a sub commander. Like that's it. And that was good enough for all of us. So when you have these people, again, saying they have these high level classifications in these departments and they're talking openly about them, it's bullshit.
The thing too that eludes so many people is that after you ask that question, what do you do? What's going on? All you know is what they told you. That's all you get that's the fact. I asked him this and here's what he said. That's the fact. How accurate it was is a whole different issue. And you said earlier, John, that there's sections of Detroit that there will be a ghost investigation nightly. When you said that, it made me think about one of the things I've learned interacting with Erica is in northeastern Utah, there is an economic ecosystem around Uintah Basin and that ranch. And it like you can kind of surmise that from, cable television. But the more I dug into it, I just didn't realize, I'd never really thought about it. But once I started really looking, I could see like, wow, like people going to Nashville with their guitar on their back. There's like people just heading out to Utah with their video camera and their laptop to write a book and to interview people and to try to be podcasters. And as a result of that, people are opening campgrounds and charging to pitch your tent. And there's pay by the week hotels. And like there's a whole environmental or an economic ecosystem built around this. And it just gets crazy, man. Like some of the people involved in it are claiming that they're doing it to make to bring economic help to the area, to raise people's income in the area, while they're simultaneously asking to cease and desist using the Skinwalker Ranch name.
Right.
And like, does that sound like something somebody would do that wants you to make money on your books and your goods? And there's just so many plots and subplots, and whose camp are they in? Are they in this camp? Or are they against them? And then, you start doing the grandma requests and getting into the real money sides of it, the real estate transactions, the sheriff's office records, and all this stuff. And it's like, is there a flying saucer anywhere in this story at any point in time? And
even we just did a records requests, not grandma, but a FOIA request for Frank Salisbury, who was, that was Frank Salisbury and Junior Hicks were kind of the backbone. They promoted all the stuff that was allegedly seen back in the 60s and kind of carried that torch. And it was like, okay, boy, even the early crew was certainly something. And, and again, it goes back to a larger, not only this, the creating that alleged, income for tourists, whatever, for the local economy, stimulating the local economy, which I really not quite sure how much it does that, because like Jack and I have discussed before, the people that are there for these conferences never go out and shop or buy anything local. So give me a break on that one. But then, you have to look at what's going on with the mining and how there are so many, regulations being broken, how many people are being exposed to, toxic chemicals, to pollutants in the environment from fracking, from, the oil, everything up there. It's an environmental catastrophe. And yet these people are involved. this
Yeah.
dad is doing, Senator, this is, Winterton is doing this. They're trying to pass legislation about that. They're making sure they're passing legislation so you can't fly drones or do LiDAR over the ranch. I wonder why that is. It's probably not because there's a UFO there. It's probably because there could be a methane leak. There could be all sorts of
Right.
things going on. And so it really, that has been a fascinating journey, not only for myself, but for Jack, for both of us combined, to look at that. And John, you bring up, again, this was your point. It's like you have to look at a bigger picture and understand where the money is flowing.
Well, and that's one of the things too, because I know you guys file a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests, and I do too. And one of the things that I've found filing Freedom of Information Act requests, so I still hard mail mine. I don't use email for my FOIA requests. I still hard mail them because I like thinking there's a paper trail, not an electronic trail, right? There's just a part of me that likes it known that it's in paper.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started in my FOIA request, when I started requesting all documents generated by this FOIA request, I want copies of too. That's where you really start to see the connections, because they start sending inter-office memos when they get your FOIA request. And then you find out that there's companies and corporations that are being CC'd on this FOIA request that don't belong to the government, but are private entities that are for some reason being CC'd on this government FOIA request. And then that just starts a whole nother landscape avalanche of documents, because when you start asking for the documents generated from your FOIA request as part of your FOIA request, you get a ton of crazy shit.
So can you give us an example, like off the top of your head, of one of the most amazing things, pieces of the puzzle that you put together?
So one of the cases that I talk about a lot is I worked for like 5 years to get all of the documents on the Kinross incident released. Kinross was in 1953. It was an airplane that flew over Lake Superior chasing a UFO, and then it vanished. And when I came to it as a researcher in about 92, I knew about it because it was a Michigan case, whatever. And so I contacted at the time some of the old guard that were still around. I contacted, Richard Hall and Kevin Randall, and just got all of their stuff that they had from it. And they kept sending me the same 50 pages of documents. And they were like, this is all the government has. And so I sent a Freedom of Information request to the DOD and the FBI and the Army and the Air Force and all of that. And I got this 50-page packet that they sent out. But in that 50-page packet, there were some page numberings that were missing. And so I asked about them in my FOIA request. Where are those? And where are those? And then because I had asked about any documents generated, there was a person who was, they were an employee of the Department of Defense, but they were a contractor. And the contractor wrote back like, we have that 50-page packet. Like, this researcher doesn't need the 500 plus pages that we have. And that was because I had requested, it came with any documents generated by this FOIA request. So now I knew they had 500 pages. And so then I had to figure out how to get those 500 pages released, because they didn't want to release them. And, this is now spanning over the course of maybe 4.5 or 5 years of chasing these documents down. Now, the way that I got them, this comes from my mentor, Craig. Craig was always like, the government's not going to treat you very nice. So sometimes you don't have to treat the government very nice. So I wrote a letter to the Department of Energy, a FOIA request for all of their Kinross documents. Now, they're not mentioned anywhere in any of the 50 pages that were released. And they called me instead of writing me. They called me and said, we don't know why you've sent us this FOIA request. And I said, oh, well, I have the packet and some documents. That's pretty much specifically how I said I had the packet and some documents, and the Department of Energy is mentioned. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. So about 2 weeks went by, and I got another phone call from the FOIA officer, and she said, I'm sitting here with this stack of 500 plus pages in front of me, and I've gone through every single one, and the Department of Energy isn't mentioned in any of them, so we can't fulfill your FOIA request. And I said, well, my FOIA request says any documents you currently have or may come into possession of, and you just told me you have 500 pages of documents in front of you, so I expect those, within the week. And strangely enough, she sent them, all of them, unredacted, with the names of everyone involved, showing that the Army or the Air Force didn't do a comprehensive search of the area.
Good work.
Yeah, and they had never paid the two military officers who had vanished in the plane. They were never classified as deceased or missing in action. They were classified as unknown in the documents, which meant that the government didn't have to pay any back benefits to the survivors. So once we showed that they had not done that, we got all that back pay and all that stuff released to the families.
Oh man.
Good job.
So it was just one off chance that got started by saying the documents generated by this FOIA request. And we ended up getting this family all this back pay, and now all the documents, are out, and you can see that they did a terrible job. And the mystery actually becomes of the case becomes even stranger, because in those documents, the plane vanished. They sent up they scrambled other jets to go and look for them. And the plane had been off the radar for 15 to 16 minutes. And when the jets got scrambled and in the air and in the area, they could still hear the pilot of the missing plane broadcasting over the radio. So he was still in the air somewhere, but not being picked up by radar. And no one's ever figured out how that's possible.
That's interesting.
Good for you. I mean, that's incredible. And for you to involve the family and to get the back pay and that acknowledgement, that is huge. And that's really, I'm sure that the closure that brought to the families was really important. That's
absolutely.
Yeah. And being able to get the names, like, there was a small Air Force, and we got all the documents for it. There was a small Air Force kind of, not tribunal, but court case that happened where they brought in witnesses and the other pilots from the other planes and stuff like that. And once I got those names, like not all of them, it was in 53 when it happened, and this is in 93, but there were still a lot of those guys alive. Retired out of service, and I called them on the phone. I just found them at the time in the phone book, and called them and got them on the record, 40 years later, something they had never talked about ever again. And so, getting to them before they died too was a big, people go away all the time. You never know what's going to happen. And so to get someone on the record, is a big deal for me.
That is really, really, really cool. That's incredible, actually. And that inspires me. That's it. If I never get documents released ever again that prove anything, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
There's some people in the chat asking about where the documents are. My website is down right now because I'm rebuilding it for 2025. But once my website comes back up, all of the Kinross documents are there in PDF and digital files.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait to look at them. Yeah, that's wow. Go ahead, Jack. Sorry to cut you off.
That's okay. Did you ever have any interest, you describing this case makes me think of it, of that Great Lakes Dive Company fiasco that Carry On and Frank Warren got?
So you're talking about the dive company that says that they found the F-89C,
and then they vanish.
Then they vanished. Yeah. So Erica, there was this company in Michigan that said that they had actually, and I think this happened in the late or early 2000s.
Yeah.
They said that they had done a radar sweep of Lake Superior and found the jet on the bottom of the ocean. It hit the newspapers, missing plane found after all these years, whatever. But then people tried to contact the dive company and it just vanished. It was gone.
Then he sweetened the pot. I was reading it on UFO updates list because that was the thing, at that time. They were claiming they found a lost jet that was purportedly involved in a UFO case, went missing. Then they started claiming our sonar underwater radar has also detected a circular object nearby. And that's when like Carry On and Frank Warren over at UFO Chronicles were like, okay, does your organization have a guy's name that runs it or anything? Yeah. And if I recall correctly, Carry On, he leaned towards, he didn't think it was your garden variety hoaxer. He thought that it might have been more nefarious and had some other more thought out method to the madness. To cut to the chase, that it might have been spooks, may have been behind it in some way, shape, or form. But well, it is an interesting story. The whole, like, we really summarized it here, but it went on for months.
Yeah, for sure. Now there is a conspiracy part of me. So when you talk about maybe there were, other people involved, like with the government trying to hoax it and stuff like that, like that discovery of the plane, I think, happened like right around 4 years after we got all of the back document or all of the back money for the families. And so it was like trying to maybe they were trying to resolve this situation by saying they had discovered the plane. But yeah,
did they claim it was that case?
Yes, they did claim it was the Kinross case.
Wow. Yeah. So no wonder it reminded me of it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. But here's the thing too. This is just a side note, and this is to any researchers out there listening. Sometimes Kinross, I spent almost 5 years working on that. Sometimes you're going to have to read stuff that you don't think is associated. So like, I came to really understand like how an F-89C Scorpion plane was built, what its underscoop air inlet tanks size were. Like, sometimes you just end up reading manuals, really dry, uninteresting stuff. But then when someone says, when I was dealing with the Air Force, and they were saying like the inlet scoop was a big point of contention, they were like, well, this plane used to have an air vent underneath where the pilots sat, and that would ice up over time, and then it would stop air from going to the jets, and then the planes would fall out of the sky. But I could speak to that and say like, but that was the retrofit on that plane underscoop jet that didn't have the screen on it, so it wouldn't have been iced over. And then they're at a loss to, because they didn't think that I read the technical manual on the plane.
Absolutely. When we were talking with some of our supporters from Patreon the other week, and I was saying how almost any given set of records we get, there are so many offshoots we could go down. Like, who's this person mentioned on page 3? And what did they mean? And like you were saying about the 50 pages that led to the 500 pages, if you start getting the hang of how to read the response, and you realize they're saying these are the responsive records, but this is like 18 pages of many more pages, because they're like referencing stuff they investigated that aren't in these pages. And there's so many more directions you could go. And one more thing, this just so stimulates my brain and gets my wheels turning. Yeah, if you just like having paper copies for your files, when you said that, my first thought was, well, what's 3 more days mail time on a 5-year project? I mean, it's not like you're going to get your stuff next Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some, Craig, my mentor, is a good example. Craig has had some open FOIA requests since the 90s. Like, they're still open. And he, has to send a letter every couple months saying that he's still interested in it. But, I mean, that stuff is not UFO related. It's usually related to Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party. And that stuff is still really locked down, much like a lot of Kennedy documents still are. But at a certain point, though, and even Craig and I've had this discussion, now he wants them just because he's had those requests open for so long. But the other thing is, too, is if you make a FOIA request and 10 years goes by, whatever you're looking for probably isn't going to be there anyway. They've either taken it out, thrown it away, or just gotten rid of it. Like, documents disappear. That's kind of where we started on this, right? Like, people can just vanish stuff.
Yeah, in this post 2017 UFO world, I've compared notes with some journalists, and we have found that when we sought emails between certain parties, yeah, you're nodding like you've done it yourself, or you've noticed the stories around. And then after years go by, they notify you that they don't have those records, which would indicate they either never existed or they were destroyed because they didn't identify them as important to keep. But the thing there is, they wait long enough that means they can use the request log to identify what should be destroyed.
Yep. And, there's the other thing is, too, I think we all know this, like, there's also, whether or not it's still like this, the majority of people who are actually filling the FOIA requests are usually unpaid interns. They're usually people who are just like working for the FOIA office, and they've been charged to it. Like, they don't have, like, the FOIA officer has something, they have a job they're supposed to do and discharge. But like, the people who are actually going through files, looking for every single piece of paper that involves this particular case or this particular person, they're not, really that invested in getting it done in the right way. It used to be like that in the 90s. Like, most of the people that worked at the Department of Defense were like unpaid interns who were doing all the FOIA requests. So, like, if you got stuff and plus we all know, like, any large company, government organization, the military, whatever, like, there's just fuck ups. There's a huge amount of military Air Force records on servicemen. I think it's between 1949 and 1954 that are gone because the building got water damaged and they just threw everything away. So
yeah, St. Louis, I think.
Yeah, it just goes away sometimes,
Yeah.
Wow, what a fun conversation. Like, and I mean, John, I'm sorry that I haven't reached out to you again. I loved meeting you and talking to you, and you're in trouble now because you're going to be on the show quite a bit. And Jessica, and so tell us about your show. I hear everybody loves it. You guys have such a great chemistry.
Yeah, it's super weird because, again, like, the first podcast that I did was in 2005, which is really strange to think about now, like how long ago that was. And I think, like, at the time I started my first podcast, I think on Apple iTunes, I think there were 15,000 podcasts. That was it. Dang. Like, it's crazy to what it is now. But during COVID, Jessica and I love being in situations where there is background conversation. I don't even really care what it is. I like going to the bar and I like overhearing weird segments of strangers' lives. There's that kind of voyeuristic side to me that actually engages my brain. And so during COVID, Jess said she wanted to try doing a podcast. And I said, well, I don't really have a format involved. What I would like to do is I would like to be the background conversation for people. So her and I talk on the phone maybe like 3 or 4 times a week. I said, what we're going to do is we'll just record a phone conversation between 2 friends and we'll release that as the podcast. And that way you don't have to listen every week. You don't have to really pay attention. It's just chit chat between 2 good friends. And I think we're rolling into next year will be the beginning of our 4th year doing it. And it's called What's Up Weirdo, and it starts with a phone call ringing, and then I say, what's up weirdo, or what's up tired lady, and she says, what's up weirdo, and then we talk for 30 or 45 minutes, as long as the conversation is, and then it ends with the phone hanging up.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great idea. and I think obviously your chemistry, the two of you've got a great chemistry and a great friendship.
Mhm.
And that's a nice way to do things. I love it. And so
Yeah, and it's
hopefully,
always good to have, like, I think one of the things that, because she's younger than I am, so it's good to have like this diverse, you have a male perspective and a female perspective, and I'm from this era and she's from this era, and we don't always agree on everything, but you can still see that friendship that's there, right? Like, it's not just the complete echo chamber of two people who like all the exact same things over and over and over again. Sometimes there's disagreements.
And you have Toad's perspective.
And you have a little cute dog. Yes, the most popular member of the podcast who will randomly bark.
He won the doggy lottery when he got in on this. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
so cool. I love it. So what are you working on next? You just
Well, I just put out this year. I put out a fanzine about a guy named Lee Childers, who was known as the Prince from Outer Space back in the 1950s. He was a baker from Detroit, and said that he was taken on a spaceship, which he called a Tregenon, and he was eventually made the king of Prince of Outer Space, but then the king died, so he became the king too. And it's just this weird contactee story from the 50s that seems to have slipped through the cracks. No one really talks about. His name was Prince Newsome. And I just did this cool little fanzine all about him. And I'm working on it's going to be a library of the curious. I'm doing little fanzines about these people I think people don't talk about. So the one I'm working on right now is about Marion Kukalo Gondola, the witch that I talked about earlier. But yeah, the one that's out now is just called The Prince from Outer Space. And even in that book, you can see, you got me into that now, these weird interconnections. Like, so he's a baker in Detroit. He's going to the Detroit Flying Saucer Club meetings. He ends up spending the night at someone else who has gone to a Detroit Flying Saucer Club meeting. Also, the night that he spends the night is Buck Nelson is there. So Buck's spending the night. 2 months after he meets Buck, Prince Newsome's story comes out that he's been abducted by flying saucers. Then he starts speaking at Giant Rock. Him and Buck get into a fight. Then George Van Tassel gets involved. And like, you start to see what we were talking about earlier. Like, oh, all these people are like connected to each other. There's no real new original story here. So yeah, it's just super interesting. It's a little glimpse into the past. I think the thing that's most funny is, even though Prince Newsome's story, Lee Childers' story, has been forgotten, I always like to look at the little aspects that make it into our culture. He is really the first person in his story back in the 1950s. He talks about meeting an extraterrestrial at a bar and having a drink with a female extraterrestrial. And that's kind of become one of those tropes that have been thrown around. Even if you look at, yeah. And that's, even if you look up into, like, nobody knows how that story started. It started with Lee, but like, if you look at the second Ghostbusters movie, Bill Murray's character is hosting this show and he's talking to this woman. She's like, oh, I met an extraterrestrial at a bar. We had a couple drinks. So it's like, even though Lee got forgotten about, that little aspect of his story about getting drunk and meeting an alien at a bar wormed its way into our kind of social convention about crazy people who see UFOs. And there's little weird things too, like the first time he says that he saw an extraterrestrial before he was abducted, he was visiting his daughter at a psychiatric hospital because she had epilepsy. And while I was writing the zine, I realized that it was the same hospital that Richard Shaver was at when Richard Shaver said he was in the caves. And so you just have these weird interconnections of all that strange.
Isn't that insane? I mean,
Yeah.
it just makes the big world seem like such a small place.
Yeah.
And what a colorful group of people, and a great thing to document. We have here all of the files on Reverend Harrison Bailey. And, those are, Jack and I keep threatening. Well, we are.
I was just making notes about that this week. I was, yeah.
And talk about, this is like 50 years of his life, and that's going to be, he was, Jack, tell us a little bit about, really quickly, some of the
Well, when
stuff that we've
you
done.
brought up the human rights issues, Black Panther Party, FBI, I almost interjected there, but I know both of you already know this, and most other people, or many of our viewers would as well, that when you said it doesn't really have anything to do with UFOs, you guys both know you stick with it far enough, it does. Yeah, I mean, the human rights stuff always collides with it. And yeah, Reverend Bailey was in California in was it 50s or 60s? I think it was the 60s.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, and he was assaulted by white supremacists and also considered himself at some point a UFO experiencer.
Right, and had some pretty famous pictures. Was that, we've got, back over there somewhere.
And suffice it to say, the story winds through some really interesting subject matter, and it's one of those things that you can look at the police records and say, okay, here's what they said about his assault, and he seems to have been drugged for one of the assaults, which really makes you start scratching your head about alien abduction. And when you were saying that just now, when you dropped that about, met an extraterrestrial in a bar, and then it winds into the mental facility, it's like, man, it just always collides with this CIA nefarious experimentation stuff. Because, like, I'm sure both of y'all know, Redfern used to write about a contactee that his story started with, somebody in a cafe putting something in his drink, and then
so that's Orfeo Angelucci.
Yeah.
He met aliens. They gave him a lemony drink to drink, and then the experience begins.
Yeah, and it just, I mean, you can just count on it. And then, enter the Nazis and the aliens, and, now we've got the police report on the, 19. Yeah.
But I mean, he was in the military, and he had what he called flying saucer disease, and he felt that he was exposed to flying saucers, and he had some very serious health complications over the years that Ann Druffel, got all of his medical records and did. I mean, I don't even know how many drawers full of files and his original artwork and all of these, things. And he was a community activist. And again, back in the day, could that have been somebody, because of his community activism, could that have been somebody that was targeted, as we know now with the evidence that he was swayed to meet two gentlemen because they wanted to exchange money for the photos that he had, and then subsequently was attacked. And so that's a good story. And John, again, you've given me great inspiration to actually get out there and really put that story forward, because again, it's one of those stories that gets lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
And there's decade after decade of correspondence between him and he and Anne, and medical records and drawings, and it's just fabulous. So thanks for inspiring me.
Well, thanks for inspiring me. I love what you and Jack are doing.
Thanks.
Thank
we have
you.
A good time.
And I'll just throw in there too, another avenue of research about that Reverend Bailey story is it's the National Socialist White People's Party that was the Toronto, Ernst Zundel and all that craziness that got the NICAP mailing list and all of that craziness that he was aligned with. That goes through it too, that during these attacks and whatnot with Bailey in California, we've got documentation that the local law enforcement was concerned about the White People's Party doing demonstrations there during this time and coming to the area, and the chief of police making it clear that, you know, we don't support this and things like that. So it all just, you know, hops back and forth along the timeline of kind of like, you know, a needle and thread just going back and forth from one side to the other. And
it's one of those things. It's one of those things when you're researching, when you're just waiting to find when the government gets involved, like whether or not, like when I sent my FOIA request for the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, and then here comes all the observation documents from the CIA and the FBI keeping track of what the Detroit Flying Saucer Club is doing. Or, you know, if you FOIA request all of Jack Parsons' documents from California, right? Like all of a sudden you find out Jack Parson is, you know, having these magical Thelema meetings, and yet he's also naming communists to the government, like saying which people are showing up that are communists. And you're like, oh shit, the government is just everywhere, keeping their eye on everything. But
Right.
what are they doing about it?
Well, and then too, you know, I think about McDonald and, you know, the fact that his wife was, you know, I mean, involved with somebody from the Black Panthers. And, you know, I mean, so of course, you know, if somebody was going to be followed, you know, it's probably not because of UFOs. It's probably because of what was going on with his wife behind the scenes politically. So, I mean, it's the whole thing is fascinating to me. And I've got to ask a very important question. Do you have a cat?
I don't. I have, I used to have cats, but I don't anymore.
Okay. I had to ask that for Amy because Amy and I both have cats. So, and she strikes you as the type of a person to have a cat.
I do. I did have cats. They both passed away many years ago, and then I've been too busy to have another one. And I'm going to Japan in January. When I come back from Japan, I will get a cat. It'll be the first cat I have in, I think, 5 years.
Oh yay!
So you're not cat averse?
No, I love cats. And even after my cats died, they were here for a little while as ghost cats. So
I love that. I'm going to go with that. I've got a couple ghost cats too. My little cute cats and stuff that passed away. But it has been a pleasure to talk to you. And you're coming back soon. So when you get back from Japan, we'll have both you and Jessica, and you know that'll be a fun show. I look forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, John.
Oh no, thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Erica, for facilitating.
Thanks, guys. And I want to just say before everybody goes, please like and subscribe. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for your support with EFR. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.com to check out our work. And then, John, your website.
It's down right now, so just find me on. I'm posting more on Blue Sky these days and Instagram, but you can just search John E.L. Tenney for ways to find me. Yeah,
I think speaking of, we're migrating to Blue Sky. I'm pretty much over Twitter and Elon Musk. So thank you guys. And thanks everybody in the audience. You guys are awesome. Have a wonderful week. Happy holidays, my friends. And we will catch you when we catch you soon. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Good night.